Okay, so you guys have sent in quite a bit of stuff for us to take a look at about how English learners can speak in a way that people actually want to listen to.
Yeah.
So we have this guide here that's specifically tailored to that topic.
It's a pretty comprehensive one, too.
Yeah, it is. It's really fascinating. And I think it goes beyond just your typical, grammar and vocabulary.
Yeah.
Like how to structure a sentence.
It's really about connection and like the emotion in your voice and...
Right.
Yeah.
How you come across as a speaker.
Exactly. It's more than just the words. It's the whole package.
Exactly. And so in this deep dive, we are going to pull out some of the most, I think, effective strategies from this guide that you guys have shared with us, and hopefully give you some things that you can really use.
Yeah, and what I like about this guide, too, is that it's very much a step-by-step journey. It gives you tools and examples along the way, and it's really geared towards kind of like a transformation of your speaking skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into it with, I guess what I would say is probably the most fundamental aspect of any speaker, but especially if you're dealing with a second language, and that is confidence.
Yeah, I mean, the guide really nails it when it says that confidence is not about perfection.
Right.
It's about being comfortable with your own voice.
Yeah.
And that comfort shines through.
Yeah.
And, really influences how the other person perceives you.
Absolutely. And I think as an English learner, you probably deal with this maybe even more so than a native speaker.
Of course, yeah.
Where you're worried about your accent.
Yeah.
You're worried about maybe grammatical errors and stuff.
Totally.
And I think that the guide really addresses that in saying, it's not about being perfect. It's about being comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your own voice. And the guide also talks about accepting your accent.
It does.
And not looking at that as a crutch or...
Yeah, as a negative thing.
Yeah, as a negative thing, but as actually something that's a part of your identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it even says, to practice saying...
This is cool.
I'm proud of my voice.
Oh, I love that.
And I think that that's a really powerful shift in thinking.
It is. And, I read some research that suggests that actually when you're less anxious about your accent, you tend to speak more fluently.
I can see that.
And then people actually focus on the message rather than on how you're saying it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so the guide also suggests that, you start small,
Yeah.
You maybe talk to yourself in English, you record yourself. To kind of get more familiar with your own sound.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk to friends that are supportive, that understand that you're learning English.
Right, that are patient with you.
Yeah. And so, and then it also goes on to talk about preparation.
Yeah.
So if you have some kind of event coming up, whether it's a presentation or an interview.
Anything like that.
Or you're going to meet someone that that you want to make a good impression on, or whatever it is. To actually take the time to maybe rehearse a little.
Totally.
And to write down some key phrases or...
I just have some idea.
An outline or whatever.
Of what you want to talk about.
Yeah. And that's something that I do a lot too.
Yeah.
Just to kind of...
Just so you're not...
So I'm not standing
You're completely lost.
Yeah,
like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, totally. And it also mentions, and I think this is something that we can all relate to, is like when you get nervous.
Yeah.
And so it even suggests the physical act of taking deep breaths.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge one.
To kind of steady your voice.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think probably most of us know that, but we don't always think about it.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We forget to breathe.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when we're nervous.
Exactly. And there's even a practice, exercise or something that it suggests to do, where you stand in front of a mirror and you say, I have something important to say, and I know people want to hear it, and to repeat that, but with increasing energy each time.
That's great.
Which I thought was really interesting.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's about like embodying that belief.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess seeing yourself as a confident speaker
Right.
is really helpful.
Yeah. And I think that, building confidence, it's not something that you're just going to do overnight.
Yeah.
It's something that you have to kind of work on and cultivate.
Yeah, it's a process.
And so all these little things I think can help to build up to that.
Yeah, they really can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from confidence, the next thing that this guide addresses is clarity.
Right.
And it even calls clarity your superpower.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool.
I mean, it's true, though.
Yeah.
You can have the most brilliant ideas in the world, but if you can't articulate them...
Nobody's going to know.
Yeah, nobody's going to understand what you're trying to say, and they're going to lose interest pretty quickly.
Right. And I think that shows a respect for your listeners,
Exactly.
you're trying to
not waste their time.
Yeah, not waste their time.
Yeah.
You know.
Be clear and concise.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the tips that it suggests is, and it's kind of a fundamental one that I think a lot of people maybe overlook, but it is to slow down.
Yeah.
You know, which when you're trying to formulate sentences in a second language, I think it can be really easy to kind of
rush through it,
speed up, because you're trying to get it all out.
Yeah, get it out
before you forget it.
Before you forget it.
And so it says to slow down, and then also to pause after sentences.
Right.
To let the listener kind of absorb what you just said.
Exactly. Give them time to process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also mentions pronunciation.
Yeah.
And, you know, focusing on some of the sounds in English that are particularly challenging, like to thee, you know, the R, the elmi, and it even suggests practicing minimal pairs.
Right.
So like think versus sink.
That's a good one.
Yeah, you know, or bat versus bet. And so these minimal pairs will help you to really distinguish between the phonemes, you know, the actual sound.
The sounds, but differentiate meaning.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you say the wrong one, then, you know,
you could say something completely different.
You change the meaning.
Yeah.
So the other thing that the guide mentions is using simple and direct language.
Right.
You know, there's no need to use these big fancy words.
Keep it simple.
Yeah. You know, happy is just as effective as ecstatic.
Yeah.
You know, in most situations.
Yeah. And sometimes simpler is actually clearer.
It's clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also like the technique that it suggests where it talks about rephrasing important points.
Yeah.
So you're not just repeating the same thing over and over again.
Right.
But you're saying it in slightly different words, which can help to kind of solidify the understanding for the listener.
Exactly.
You know, and I thought the example that it gave was really good. You know, I believe teamwork is essential. Collaborating effectively leads to better outcomes. So it's the same
idea.
Yeah.
But said in two different ways.
Yeah. And I think particularly for people who are listening in a second language, you know, it's not their native language.
Yeah.
That kind of redundancy is really helpful.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. And then of course the classic, you know, practice exercise. Yeah. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah, it's a staple.
Yeah.
And, you know, it forces you to articulate every single sound.
Yeah. It uses all the sounds of the English language.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So, you know, we've talked about clear speech, but then the guide goes on to another really interesting point, and that is using your voice like a musical instrument.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I love that idea. Because it really emphasizes that how you say something is just as important as what you're saying.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, if you think about someone who's speaking in a monotone,
right, so boring.
It's just hard to listen to.
Yeah.
And so the guide contrasts that with someone who's speaking with variation in their voice.
Right.
You know, and it talks about some specific techniques that you can use, like varying your pitch.
Yeah.
You know, to indicate different emotions.
Yeah.
So, you know, you might have a higher pitch if you're expressing excitement.
Yeah.
And a lower pitch if you're trying to convey something more serious.
Yeah.
And it even gives the example of, I can't believe it, you know, saying that in a high pitch and saying that in a low pitch.
It changes the meaning completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just being aware of that, I think, is really...
Yeah, just noticing how you sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, also adjusting your volume.
Oh, yeah.
You know, not to the point of shouting, but using it in a way that... strategically.
Yeah.
To grab attention or maybe to draw people in.
Right, like if you're telling a secret or something like that.
Exactly.
You lower your voice.
Yeah. And then it also mentions using pauses.
Pauses are so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's something that as speakers...
I think we forget about them a lot.
Yeah.
Because we're so focused on the words.
Right.
But silence can actually be really powerful when it comes to speaking.
Absolutely. And so, you know, like pausing before you say something really important or pausing after to kind of let it sink in.
Exactly.
And the example that it gives is, I have an idea. ... And then a pause.
Yeah.
It could change everything.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also aligning your vocal tone with the emotion that you're expressing.
Right. So if you're saying something sad, you don't want to sound happy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You want to be genuine.
Exactly. Yeah.
Be authentic. Exactly. And it gives the example of like telling a friend about a trip you took.
Yeah.
And how naturally you're going to kind of go up and down with your pitch.
Yeah.
And you're going to pause and you're going to
vary your volume.
Yeah, vary your volume, and it's like you're almost doing it subconsciously.
Right.
But it's so effective.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that we can all kind of learn from.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on to, I think, a really fun part of the guide, which is storytelling.
This is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and it suggests that, storytelling is a powerful tool.
Oh, yeah.
Because as humans, we love stories.
Yeah, we're drawn to them.
Yeah, and we remember things better when they're told in the form of a story.
Absolutely.
And so rather than just stating facts,
right,
it's better to kind of illustrate those facts.
With an anecdote or something.
Yeah, with a story.
Yeah.
And so it gives the example of, instead of just saying, I'm a hard worker.
Right.
Which
is boring.
Which is kind of boring. Yeah. Tell me about a time when you worked really hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you stayed late to finish a project or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so I think that that's something that, we can all kind of try to incorporate.
It makes it relatable. If you're just saying I'm hardworking,
right,
it's like, okay.
Doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but if you tell a story, people can connect with that.
Exactly. And the guide also kind of breaks down, what makes a good story.
Yeah.
Starting with a hook.
Right.
To really grab the listener's attention.
Grab them from the beginning.
Yeah, from the beginning. And it gives an example of a weak hook.
Right.
And then a strong hook.
Yeah.
To kind of show you the difference.
Show the contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also mentions keeping the language simple.
Yeah.
So using short sentences, basic words. You don't have to use all these big fancy words.
Yeah. Don't try to be too complicated.
Yeah, when you're telling a story.
Yeah, just let the story speak for itself.
Right. And then also to weave in emotional depth. So to actually share how you felt during the events of the story.
That's what makes it engaging.
Yeah, because that's how the listener's going to
connect.
Yeah, connect.
And feel what you felt.
Yeah, empathize with your experience.
Yeah.
And then finally, concluding with a clear takeaway.
Right.
That relates back to the point that you're trying to make.
It shouldn't just be a random story.
Right.
It should have a purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it suggests, a little practice story. So to tell a 3-sentence story.
That's a good one.
Yeah, about a personal experience. So it's, something simple like, spilling coffee on yourself or
missing the bus
or whatever.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And to actually practice telling it.
Out loud.
Yeah. Out loud.
Yeah.
And to really try to convey
the feeling.
Yeah, the feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're building confidence. We're speaking clearly. We're using our voice. We're telling stories. What's the next thing?
Connecting with your audience.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is all about making the listener feel seen and understood.
I love that.
Yeah, it's about making it a two-way street.
Right. It's not just, I'm up here speaking.
Yeah, it's a conversation.
Yeah.
And you're acknowledging that there's someone else in the room.
Yeah, and I think that makes you as a speaker, warmer.
It does.
More real.
More human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it says that, a speaker who ignores their audience is going to come across as distant.
Right.
And someone who actually tries to connect.
Is it going to be much more engaging?
Yeah, it's going to be much more engaging.
Right.
And so it suggests some strategies for doing that, knowing your audience.
Right.
And using language that's relevant to them.
Yeah.
So, if you're talking to children, you're going to use different language and examples than if you're talking to adults.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And, asking questions.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is so huge.
That's so important.
Because it shows that you're actually,
that you care.
You care about what they think.
What they think. Yeah.
Even if you don't get a verbal response.
Right.
It's still like.
It makes them think.
It makes them think.
And it makes them feel like you care about their opinion.
Totally. And it also suggests using the pronoun you.
Oh, yeah.
Which, again, I think is so powerful.
It is.
Because it makes it personal.
Yeah. You can achieve this.
Right.
Is much better
right.
than people can achieve this.
Yeah. It's like you're speaking directly.
Right. To that person.
To them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, of course, smiling.
Yeah.
Making eye contact.
Body language is huge.
Yeah. And I love the example that it gives where it talks about framing a difficulty that you encountered, in learning English by saying, how hard English can be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I struggle with this too.
Right.
But here's what helped me.
Sharing that experience.
Yeah. And I think that makes you as a speaker so relatable.
It does.
Because you're showing that you're
human.
You're human.
You've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you're connecting with your audience, and then the guide kind of shifts gears a little bit and talks about being concise.
Right.
And I think this is so valuable.
It is.
Because people's, minds wander.
They do, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
Everyone's so busy.
Yeah. And short, sharp ideas, I think, are more impactful.
They are.
And it contrasts that with, I think the tendency for some English learners to kind of over-explain.
Right.
And I think sometimes it's because
we're so worried about being understood that we go
overboard.
We go overboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it suggests some really good techniques for being more concise.
Yeah.
Starting with, planning what you're going to say before you say it.
Right. Have that one main point.
Yeah. And sticking to that one point.
Yeah. And then, cutting out unnecessary words.
Yes.
And so I'm tired versus I'm feeling very exhausted right now.
Right. Much simpler.
Much simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also using examples instead of lengthy explanations.
Right.
So like I worked all night.
Yeah.
Versus I was engaged in numerous tasks throughout the entirety of the night and consequently did not have the opportunity to sleep.
Exactly. Nobody wants to hear that.
Nobody wants to hear all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also knowing when to stop speaking.
Yes.
Once you've made your point.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
It is.
Yeah. And then it gives this practice, exercise where you say,
okay,
I love learning English because it opens doors.
I like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to try to say that in one breath.
Right. Because if you start adding all these extra words, it loses its power.
It loses its power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're getting into the, even if you do all of this, you're still going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you're speaking English as a second language.
Of course.
And so the guide addresses that.
It does.
And it starts out by saying, mistakes are normal.
They're part of the process.
Yeah. And what really matters is how you handle them.
That's what people remember.
Right. And it says that, listeners are generally forgiving.
They are.
And that they admire effort more than perfection.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's so important to keep in mind.
It is.
Because we can be so hard on ourselves.
We're our own worst critics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it gives some, tips for recovering gracefully.
Yeah.
So staying calm.
Right.
Pausing, maybe smiling.
Yeah.
And then just correcting the error directly.
Yeah, just say it again.
Yeah. And so like I got,
Right.
And then I went.
Exactly. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also suggests, maybe using some humor.
Yeah.
To kind of lighten the situation.
Yeah. Like, oh, English is tricky, something like that.
Yeah. And I think that can really help to kind of
diffuse the tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just continuing on.
Yeah. Don't dwell on it.
Don't dwell on it.
Yeah.
And then it also says, to learn from the mistake privately later.
Right.
So that you can continue to improve.
Yeah. Don't beat yourself up about it, but just make a mental note.
Yeah. And I love the example that it gives, which is correcting yourself mid-sentence.
Yeah.
So yesterday I saw a great movie.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And it's like just...
You caught yourself.
Yeah.
And you fixed it.
Yeah. And it's no big deal.
No big deal.
Yeah. Okay, so finally, the guide talks about the importance of practice.
Of course, practice makes perfect.
Yeah. And it says that, great speaking, just like any other skill, is developed through practice.
Absolutely.
And that repetition builds habits.
It does.
And so it makes speaking easier over time.
It becomes more natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it suggests some, daily practice methods.
Okay.
Like talking to yourself in English.
Yeah.
Which I do all the time.
I do too.
Describing your daily activities aloud.
So people think you're crazy, but it's helpful.
Copying native speakers.
Yeah.
So finding videos.
Of people that you admire.
Yeah.
And copying their tone and rhythm.
Yeah.
TED Talks are great for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then also joining conversations, with friends, classmates, or, online language exchange platforms.
Like Hello Talk.
Yeah, like Hello Talk or Tandem or whatever.
Yeah, there's so many options now.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And then setting achievable goals,
Right.
So, maybe starting with 5 minutes a day.
Yeah, start small.
Yeah, and gradually increasing that.
And then build up from there.
Yeah, and I like the example daily routine that it gives. Maybe in the morning you express gratitude in English.
That's a good word.
And then in the afternoon, maybe you read a news headline out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in the evening, you tell a short story.
That's perfect.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like breaking it down into manageable chunks.
Yeah. And making it part of your routine.
Yeah.
So it's not so overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really a comprehensive roadmap, I think, for speaking English effectively.
It is. It covers everything.
Yeah. And so, as the listener, we really encourage you to start implementing these strategies.
Yeah, even in small ways. Just pick one and start today.
Yeah.
And just notice the difference.
Right. Absolutely. And I think as you continue on your journey, with learning English, maybe think about which of these areas that we discussed. The confidence, the clarity, the using your voice, the storytelling, the connection, the conciseness, the how you handle mistakes, the practicing.
Yeah.
Which one of those do you think is like your biggest opportunity for growth right now?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and focus on that.
Yeah.
In your next English conversation and just see.
And see what happens, how it changes the interaction.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So good luck.
Absolutely.
Out there.
All right.
Happy speaking.
Oh, thanks.